The reason we're having this conversation, I think, is to see what other people might be interested in terms of these topics that you and I have become quite interested in. And I think the place to begin is to talk about, is there a difference between management and managing? You know, traditionally, managing has had four components to it, right? Controlling, organizing, leading, and planning. Those are the four features. And traditionally, those four things, those four activities, were done by a special class of employees called managers, or management, right? And so this was in practice since the early days of the Industrial Revolution, during the textile years in England and elsewhere. And then it was formalized as the way to think about this, and management as a scientific pursuit by Taylor at the turn of the 20th century. And so, even though Taylor had critics later, and especially, say, into the 60s and 70s and 80s, that he was too harsh, too overbearing, too manipulative, no one, even his fiercest critics, I think, questioned the need for management. But now, with the decline of the industrial model, and we get into what some people call the post-industrial era, questions are beginning to arise. Can we manage without managers? And so I think that's the question we'd like to open with. What do you think about that?
Well, I think you point to the inherited legacy of management and mindsets regarding management. It's interesting you mentioned Taylor, and it's interesting you mentioned control. Right? Those are the two things that jumped out from your introduction. You know, if Taylor was to come back today, I think he'd recognize 99% of companies and how they're run. Right?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that.
I mean, you know, we may make fun of bureaucracy. We may really say that we've moved beyond it, but really most companies are bureaucratic. What do I mean by that? Right? How they hire people, the process of hiring, the process of, quote, orienting people to the culture of that company, the process of evaluating, right? The process of designating and clearly stating people's responsibilities, right? And holding them, quote, accountable for what is designated. Right. And as you say, controlling, right? Right. The biggest single sort of paradigm that people have is control. But the notion of control that came from that era was, how do we get the most out of people?
Right.
How do we get the most out of people?
Yeah. Taylor's view of humanity was basically people didn't really want to work, they weren't very motivated, and really it was the job of management to figure out the best way to motivate them. And so he had all those early experiments about workloads and stuff like that. Right. And that theme has never gone away.
No.
That theme has never gone away.
And if you look at it, you know, getting, how do I get the most out of you? How do we get the most out of you?
Yes.
That is, mean you're resistant, we should use all our skills, all our manipulation, all our rewards, all our ability to get you to do more than you would willingly do.
Yes, yes.
My God, right?
So, and you did that primarily by telling me things.
Of course.
By telling me.
By telling you, by directing you, by controlling you.
Yeah.
Right? And by putting a process, a map in place about your position in the organization, your role in the organization, your responsibility in the organization.
And limiting my authority within the organization.
Indeed. And very clear hierarchies, very clear and very precise. And that's what we're trying to get away from, right? So instead of, how do I get the most out of you, the question, creative companies, forward-looking companies are turning that on its head. And so they're inverting this traditional pyramid. Right. And they're saying, my job now as a manager is to ask you, you are a smart person, you understand our mission, you understand our goals, you understand our customers, you understand what we're doing here. My only question is, how can I help you? How can I help you? How can we help you?
Yeah.
And that's turning the pyramid upside down.
It is. And you talked about if Taylor had come back, he'd recognize most companies as pretty much unchanged from what he saw. And we were talking before, if you showed almost anybody on the planet that worked for anybody just a blank hierarchy chart, they would know right away what it was, right?
Indeed.
So those two things have remained constant for a long time. But now they're being challenged. And you had said, well, you know, some companies are inverting the pyramid upside down so that the people on the top now are the people on the bottom and asking, what can I do for you? But some companies are trying to toss the hierarchical chart out altogether and replace it with a different understanding of how people are to
Indeed.
relate to each other and how they're to perform those 4 functions or something like that.
Indeed.
So what's replacing this hierarchy chart for some companies?
Look, it's a work in progress. Companies that approach this from the beginning, right? They say, we're a new company, we want to respect, we want to empower, we want to co-opt our workers, and we want to engage them over time, from the very beginning. Then they create this kind of web of relationships.
Okay.
I would say web is the best metaphor.
Okay.
And what is a web, right? A web is a sort of exchange of ideas, exchange of commitments, exchange of promises, right?
Of expectations.
Of expectations. And it's a collaboration, but it's not amorphous and sort of do what you want. It's, you know, you and I, Randy, welcome to this organization. What are your skills? Wonderful, you're a great person, you've got so many diverse skills. How can you help us in given what we are doing here? Where do you best fit in? Do you think?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think, given where you are today, not necessarily what your degree is, not necessarily what your last job was, because we are constantly changing. We are constantly changing, and companies have to recognize that. Companies have to appreciate that. And so you're going to do what, Randy? You're going to do what for this organization?
And I think that's what a general trend is of the people who are challenging the pyramid. They're thinking of this as a web of interdependent relationships. I think Peter Senge describes it as the web of interdependent relationships. And you made this interesting thing that you and I would talk about what we might do or what I might do for the organization and for you. But then I might also be talking with Donnie, right? And I might negotiate something different with Donnie than I did with you, right?
Indeed.
I'm creating different expectations with different people. And so the idea that I have this job description that just describes what I do generally, right? Now I'm with this web notion, I've got different things I'm doing for different people.
Promises,
that
commitments.
I'm negotiating with them.
Indeed.
Right?
Indeed.
So it looks like something very different from this boxy
Right.
pyramid. It
Right.
looks like a spider web.
Indeed.
Or a constellation web or something like that.
Now we shouldn't fool ourselves. This is complex, obviously. You have to be dexterous.
Extraordinarily
You have to
complex.
be dexterous. You have to be really responsive. You have to develop relationships. You have to
Yeah.
develop relationships. We have to nurture the development of relationships rather than just roles.
Right.
And that is a
Yeah, yeah,
different
yeah.
paradigm.
Yeah, I
right?
think that's true.
That
It-
is a different paradigm.
It's more complicated. It requires more skillful people.
It does. does.
A deeper skill set. And not just deeper skill set for interpersonal stuff, but deeper skill set in how I understand the working of the whole company, because I now have to make larger decisions. I have to cooperate with others in making it. I have to understand financial commitments and those kinds of things.
So orientation becomes a lot more complex than telling you, you know, the PTO policy, or
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
or, or your hierarchy. It becomes really, we're introducing you to the organization, to people who are doing this.
Yeah.
And so, you know, companies that are willing to do that, willing to invest, are rewarded. Now, this is the bottom line. Because we are liberating you to be yourself, to be creative, to be innovative, to be paradigm shifting, to be expansive. And that is what modern organizations, that's how the world is, right?
Right.
The world is changing too quickly for fixed.
Right. And I think that's
fossilized
the
roles.
question, you know, why is this happening at this point, right? Why is this happening now? And I think that the way that the business environment has evolved at this point, it's putting greater and greater pressure on traditional organizations. And the cost of having this hierarchy in place is become prohibitive for many organizations. The cost, financial cost, the cost in terms of employee lack of involvement, the employees are not making the contributions that people hoped they would, lost opportunity costs,
Indeed.
Lost costs of being able to connect more directly with customers and customer demand. All of those things in the environment now are driving pressures on companies, and if they're going to be stuck in this old hierarchical system, command and control from the top down, they're not going to be able to respond to the marketplace, they're not going to be able to respond to the technology,
Right.
they're not going to be able to respond to the customers.
And the world is you know, amorphous, right? And this notion, the traditional hierarchy, Henry Ford and Taylor, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Regular inputs, regular process, predictable processes, and predictable outputs.
Right.
That was the paradigm. That was the
paradigm.
assumption.
And notice that paradigm views the organization as a machine.
As a machine.
Right? As a machine.
Yes, yes.
Inputs, process, outputs. The new way that you and I are talking about it, the organization looks like an organism rather than a machine. So it has growth, it has response to the environment, it has interconnected relationships.
Right.
You can't change one thing without something else changing.
Indeed.
Right? So I think the new mentality is, how do we see this as a living organization rather than a well-oiled machine?
Right. And that may be the metaphor we want to take away, right? The organization as an organism.
Yeah, I think that's a new way, a completely new way of thinking about
Right.
organizations, and
Right.
and it's hard to get your head around that exactly.
Mhm.
How is this going to really change things, especially when you start talking about traditional things? How do we hire people? How do we set a compensation?
Mhm.
How do we
Evaluate. Right.
This all is part of the pyramid, and I'm not sure, and I don't think everybody is sure, how it fits into a web of interconnected relationships.
Right, and that's the challenge. That's the challenge. But there are companies that are doing this.
Taking up the challenge.
There are companies that are doing this. There are in the U.S., for example, we have traditional companies. W.L. Gore, manufacturer. We have Morningstar, a tomato processing company. We have Sun Hydraulics, which is a hydraulics company of 1,000 people that without a organizational chart as such, right?
Well,
We have Whirlpool is calling its managers people leaders. It's liberating them from that traditional model of leader, and it is inverting the pyramid within Whirlpool, a very traditional organization, right? We have Deloitte. We have, even locally here, we have Flexible Steel Lacing in Downers Grove, Illinois.
we have our friends that make sausage in Wisconsin,
Indeed.
Johnsonville
Indeed.
Sausage Company.
Indeed.
One of the first companies, I think, to really experiment with this in a big way was Johnsonville.
Ah.
So I think there are models.
There are certainly models, and those aren't traditional. Now, of course, if you go to the IT sector, there's a whole bunch of other, there's Qualcomm, there's Valve, Medium, Insight Global, Automatic, Twitter has done all kinds of interesting things, Electronic Arts, Shopify, and they're all pushing the envelope in this area.
So one of the interesting things I think that's happening now is, which we would expect to happen in this kind of environment, is as people challenge the traditional organization, right, they're going to have to experiment.
Yes.
They're going to have trial, they're going to have to make
Yes.
mistakes, they're going to have errors, right? Just as any organism adapting to new environments is going to have trial and error, right?
Mhm.
And some are going to thrive and survive, and others are going to fall by the wayside.
Right.
But I do think there are some trends emerging out of that, and I think one of the trends is these interconnected webs based on relationships. I think the decentralization of decision making is also a trend. I mean, that's the whole point, right? You cannot concentrate all of this here, right? I think deeper training and development of employees
is vital.
is
Of
absolutely
course,
critical.
it's
You cannot do this
Sure.
if you're not really committed to that.
Right.
So I think there are some emerging themes
Mhm.
in these post-industrial organizations. How they doing any particular activity, I think, varies from organization to organization.
Indeed.
And you know, Patrick, that may be the mark of the post-industrial period too. As we were saying, in the industrial realm, everybody had the same organization. Didn't matter, you changed at the margins, but essentially it was the pyramid, hierarchical reporting, command and control.
Right, right.
But in the new way, there may be a myriad of different ways that people do it
Exactly.
depending upon their environment, their markets,
Right.
the kind of
Right.
business they're
Right.
in, the
Right.
employees that they can attract. So we may see a lot of different ways to go
Indeed.
about the traditional managing functions.
But some of the fundamentals remain, right? This is all, the chassis on which all this works is the premise that, that it values the individual worker. And truly, that has to be transparent. I mean, everyone may say it and whatever, but this actually puts it on a different plane.
Right.
So that is in the DNA of the organization. We really value your previous experience, your intellectual or skill capacity, your ability to think, to work with others, to look out and to look in. So at the same time,
Yeah.
we are transparent in what we do, right? We have open communication, or we have certainly communication mechanisms that allow us to capture your learning, that allow us to evaluate you maybe, if not in real time, in shorter time than certainly the 1 year, that allow us to compliment you, and the compliments don't have to be from the boss. They can be from peers.
In some places, there are no bosses anymore, so it doesn't come from the boss, it comes from each other,
It
right?
comes from each other.
Comes from each other.
And our ability to reward you. And so this notion, that's what the key is. It's this kind of shift to, nothing less than a worker, employee, owner focus. And from that premise comes all kinds of liberating
Yeah, right.
approaches to the common problems that every organization is facing. So this is like, that's what we're talking about. We're just talking about taking the hierarchy as is, and if not inverting it, but at least
Undoing it somehow.
undoing it.
Right. We still have to manage.
We do indeed.
We do have to manage. We do have to have some kind of accountability. We have to have some kind of coordination or control, if you'd like. We have to plan for what's going to happen in the future.
We have to allocate and
we have to
find
allocate,
resources.
and we have to
Right.
organize the work. That is not going to change.
No,
How we do that is up for grabs.
indeed, indeed.
So managing remains. The question is, will there be managers? That's what we're trying to get at. And you and I are working on a workshop
We are indeed.
to bring out these issues and to explore these topics and to
Indeed.
provide some examples.
Indeed.
And we're just checking out to see who might be interested in this.
Indeed.
Right?
And
Are
that's-
there any other, borderline people out there like us?
There are.
And we know there are, right? Are there any in town? That's the
There are
question.
indeed, and there are many, and there are people, really, I know some companies right here in the Quad City area that are really beginning to,
Yeah.
to play with these variables. in the
Right.
organization.
So we've talked about this too. Like, here's our current reality where we've got a really traditionally structured hierarchical system,
Mhm.
a lot of command and control, and we want to be over here.
Right.
Right? So we can't make this leap all at once. So one of the things we want to talk to people about is what can you do? right?
Incremental steps.
Incremental. What can you do to
steps,
move yourself closer to the benefits of having these kind of organizations?
Right, right.
So, yeah, there are people out there who are doing this stuff that's really innovative and all, but you may not be able to move
Right,
all the way. But
Right.
you could move closer, and if you could move closer, what would that look like?
right.
And we'd like to get people to think about that.
We would indeed, and there are many models of change. One of them I like is unfreezing current perceptions, moving and then refreezing. I think we can certainly take away the refreezing. That era is gone. But part of our job is to unfreeze this notion of the inherited roles and hierarchies and so
Yeah.
on.
Well, I think really what's happening is that the environment the business has to operate in is unfreezing them or killing them, right? They're either going to have to loosen this up to compete and be successful, or they're
Yeah.
going to go under. Now,
Right.
some of them that's already occurring. Others, it's not occurring yet, but I think it will down the road. So it's not something that you and I have to do or other change agents have to do. The business competitive environment, the international environment, technology, demographics, customer demand are all making that,
You could call those megatrends, right?
are
You
all
could-
making this necessary.
Right, and those who survive the megatrends, and megatrends are trans-organizational, trans-sector, transnational, right? Trans-technological,
Yeah,
that are really impacting all of us.
Right.
And really, companies that are dexterous, flexible, are the ones that will survive. Now, this may be a cliche, But in this context, we're talking about innovation in management. Now, companies would say they're very innovative in processes. They would say they're very innovative in products, but they are not innovative in management approaches. That's what we want to do. So we will say yes, kudos on processes, kudos on products, but now let's go to the big one. And we know from research that innovation in management approaches are the ones that actually lead to the greatest rewards.
Good.
And that's where we're at.
All right, so we welcome people to join us in conversation, and we welcome people to join us in the workshop.
We do
And
indeed.
we'll be evolving with this as well.
We will indeed.
Okay,
We will
good.
indeed.
Thanks, bud.
Thank you.
Thanks, Don.
Thank you.